I've stories from the shed. Danny, the champion of the world. Let's say hello to everybody as normal. Evening, Rebel. And down by Rebel, we've got Victor Hazell here. Now, we're going to see a lot of Victor Hazell today. Over here, we've got Pesco. There we are. And over here, we've got Mr. Shoutout. I've got another shout-out for Amna in year 3, because she has been doing some fantastic work on Seesaw. She's trying so hard. I'm really proud of you, Amna. So well done. Right, at the end of chapter 19, all of the pheasants had woken up from the pram, and they were all sitting on top of Danny's dad's garage and outside the garage, and they were sitting all over Doc Spencer's car. And outside the garage, we have Danny's dad, and Doc Spencer. And right at the end of chapter 19, Mr. Victor Hazell arrives in his big fancy car. There's his fancy car. And here's Mr. Victor Hazell, and he finally arrives. And I wonder what he is going to say. The big shiny Rolls Royce had braked suddenly and come to a stop right alongside the filling station. Behind the wheel I could see the enormous pink beery face of Mr. Victor Hazell staring at the pheasants. I could see the mouth hanging open, the eyes bulging out of his head like toadstools, and the skin of his face turning from pink to bright scarlet. The car door opened and out he came. Let's have a look at him. Resplendent in fawn riding-covered breeches and high-polished boots, there was a yellow scarf. I'll see if I can find it. There we are. There was a yellow scarf, a silk scarf with red dots on it around his neck, and he had a sort of bowler hat upon his head. The great shooting party was about to begin, and he was on his way to greet the guests. There he is. He doesn't look very happy as he's surrounded by pheasants. He left the door of the Rolls open and came at us like a charging bull. My father, Doc Spencer and I stood together in a little group waiting for him. He started shouting at us the moment he got out of the car, and he went on shouting for quite a long time after that. I am sure you'd like to know what he said, but I cannot possibly repeat it here. The language he used was so foul and filthy it scorched my ear holes. Words came out of his mouth that I had never heard before and hope never to hear again. Little flecks of white foam began forming around his lips and running down his chin onto the yellow silk scarf. It sounds as if he's furious. I glanced at my father, who was standing very still and very calm, waiting for the shouting to finish. The colour was back in his cheeks now, and I could see the tiny twinkling wrinkles of a smile around the corners of his eyes. Doc Spencer stood beside him, and he was also very calm. This is a super simile. Listen to this, children. Doc Spencer was looking at Mr. Hazell in the same way as one would look at a slug on a leaf of lettuce in the salad. He's looking at him disgusted. I myself did not feel quite so calm. But they're not your pheasants, they are mine, said my father at last. Don't lie to me, man, yelled Mr. Hazell. I'm the only one around here who has pheasants. They're on my land, my father said quietly. They flew onto my land, and so long as they stay on my land, they belong to me. Don't you know the rules, you bloated old blue-faced baboon? Doc Spencer started to giggle. Mr. Hazell's skin turned from scarlet to purple. His eyes and his cheeks were bulging so much with rage it looked as though someone was blowing up his face with a pump. He glared at my father, then he glared at the dopey pheasants swarming all over the filling station. What's the matter with them? He shouted. What have you done to him? At this point, pedalling grandly towards us on his black bicycle, came the arm of the law in the case of Mr. Sgt Samways. Resplendent in his blue uniform and shiny silver buttons, it was always a mystery to me how Sgt Samways could sniff out trouble wherever it was. Let there be a few boys fighting on the pavement or two motorists arguing over a dented bumper, and you could bet your life The village policeman could be there within minutes. We saw him coming, and a little hush fell upon the entire company. Oh, the police are here. I imagine the same thing happens when a king or president enters a room full of chattering people. Sgt Samways got off his bicycle, and for a full half-minute he allowed his eyes to travel round slowly the filling station, gazing at the mass of pheasants squatting all over the place. The rest of us, including Mr. Hazell, waited in silence for judgment to be pronounced. Well, said Sgt Samways at last. Puffing out his chest and addressing nobody in particular. What, may I ask, is happening around here? Sgt Samways had a funny habit of sometimes putting the letter H in front of words that shouldn't have an H there at all. And as though to balance things out, he would take the H away from all the words that should have begun with that letter. I'll tell you what's happening round here, shouted Mr. Hazell, advancing upon the policeman. These are my pheasants, and this rogue, pointing at my father, has enticed them out of my woods onto his filthy little filling station. Right, so just let me change the picture. And there he is, there's Sgt Samways. Enticed, said Sgt Samways, looking first at Mr. Hazell, then at us. Enticed them, did you say? Of course he enticed them. Well, now, said the sergeant, propping his bicycle carefully against one of our pumps, this is a very interesting accusation. Very interesting indeed, because I ain't never heard of nobody enticing a pheasant across 6 miles of field and open countryside. How do you think this enticing was performed, Mr. Hazell, if I may ask? Don't ask me how he did it, because I don't know, shouted Mr. Hazell. But he's done it all right. The proof is all around you. All my finest birds are sitting here in this dirty little filling station when they ought to be up in my own wood getting ready for the shoot. The words poured out of Mr. Hazell's mouth like hot lava from an erupting volcano. Am I correct, said Sgt Samways, am I absolutely accurate in thinking that today is the day of your great shooting party, Mr. Hazell? That's the whole point, cried Mr. Hazell, stabbing his forefinger into the sergeant's chest as though he were punching a typewriter or an adding machine. And if I don't get these birds back on my land quick sharp, some very important people are going to be extremely angry this morning, and one of my guests, I'll have you know, Sergeant, is none other than your own boss, the Chief Constable of the county, so you had better do something about it fast, hadn't you, unless you want to lose those sergeant stripes of yours. I don't think the policeman will like Mr. Hazell threatening him. Sgt Samways did not like people poking his fingers in his chest. Least of all Mr. Hazell, and he showed it by twitching his upper lip so violently that his moustache came alive and jumped about like some small bristly animal. Now, just 1 minute, he said to Mr. Hazell. Just 1 minute, please. Am I to understand that you are accusing this gentleman here of committing this act? Of course I am, cried Mr. Hazell. I know he did it. And do you have any evidence to support this accusation? The evidence is all around you, shouted Mr. Hazell. Are you blind or something? Now my father stepped forward. He took one small pace to the front and fixed Mr. Hazell with his marvellous bright, twinkly eyes. So there's Sgt Samways in between them. Surely you know how these pheasants came here, he said softly. Surely I do not know how they came here, snapped Mr. Hazell. Then I shall tell you, my father said, because it's quite simple, really. They all knew they were going to be shot today if they stayed in your wood, so they flew in here to wait until the shooting was over. Rubbish! Yelled Mr. Hazell. It's not rubbish at all, my father said. They are extremely intelligent birds, pheasants. Isn't that so, Doctor? Oh, yes. They have tremendous brain power. They have tremendous brain power, Dr. Spencer said. They know exactly what's going on. It would undoubtedly be a great honour, my father said, to be shot by the Chief Constable of the county, and an even greater one to be eaten afterwards by Lord Thistlethwaite, but I do not think a pheasant feels the same way. So I feel that they've come here on their own accord, Mr. Hazell.